Happy Zoom Wednesday, everyone. So this week's book of the week is actually a new type for me, which is a book from the management consulting world. Now, a while back, I was in the middle of whiteboarding with our team, and our senior vice president, Rebecca Lynn, made a comment. And I always tell people, pay very close attention to the things that people say around you, because there's a lot of pearls and great ideas there. And one of the comments that Rebecca said was, the value of coming up and using mental models and frameworks. And she said, the management consulting world like McKinsey and BCG, they're really good at this. And so, of course, that day I went and bought 3 or 4 books from the management consulting world just to really learn about it. And one of the books I want to share with you today is called The McKinsey Mind: Understanding and Implementing the Problem-Solving Tools and Management Techniques of the World's Top Strategic Consulting Firm, by Ethan M.R. Rasiel and Paul N. Friga. And I really enjoyed this book because it does give you a step-by-step guide of how a McKinsey consultant approaches a problem and consults to their clients. Now, I do have to make a comment. Sorry, guys. So back in 2002, this is a fantastic book design cover. But as you can tell, you may need to do an update on your design because it does look like a management consultant book, because the graphics are pretty much from Microsoft PowerPoint at this point. But again, back in 2002, great design. 2020, may want to update that. Just a little suggestion. Now, one of the core features of a McKinsey consultant is being able to frame a problem in such a structured way that you can rigorously test it using a fact-based analysis. And of course, from this, we come up with this McKinsey framework. Now, this strategic model that McKinsey uses is broken down into 6 discrete steps. And the book walks you through each of those, including implementation and exercise of how to think about it. But there's one specific area I want to focus on that I think if you do not get right, the rest of the model just does not make any sense. And even if you don't use the McKinsey approach, this one specific pro from the book will really set you up for success when you're whiteboarding and really developing a go-to-market strategy or commercial strategy, or product strategy, no matter what company you're at. Now, the first key area and the first step under analyzing is framing, right? And if you're not able to frame a problem appropriately, you're not going to do a good job of developing a map to solve it, right? By properly framing a problem, you not only leave it up to be tested very rigorously, but more importantly, this is how you develop your hypothesis. Again, you need a hypothesis. Think about the scientific method to essentially test your assumptions and do some data gathering and some analysis and testing to figure out what assumptions are correct and what are wrong. And that's how you end up deciding where you pivot and evolve and adapt your strategy. Now, without a framework or structure, your ideas are just not going to stand up. They're not going to take root in the organization. And having a structure will strengthen your thinking. Now, here's the most important thing, is that you need to use these frameworks very much as a way of illumination. So if you think of a framework, you should not use a framework like a drunkard uses a lamppost, which is for support rather than illumination. The whole key here is illuminating the right path to go down. When you have inappropriate thinking processes and a complete absence of structured thought, that's how you end up with strategies that just don't make sense, and companies spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time going down the wrong path. Again, because they didn't frame the problem the right way, and thus they didn't make the right assumptions and couldn't test the right hypotheses through data gathering and analysis. You see where I'm going with this? Now, this can all be boiled down into one very specific question that you should ask yourself. Do we know where we're going, and do we have a growth strategy to get there, right? Because if you don't have anything to aim at, you don't know where you're going, you don't technically know what routes and paths you're going to take to get there, right? The best way to come up with a frame is to start at the very end, start with the end in mind, and then reverse engineer backwards to figure out how you get there. Now, one of the principles that was developed at McKinsey is the MECE principle, M-E-C-E, standing for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And this was developed by Barbara Minto at McKinsey back in the late 1960s. And many of the tenets of this approach and this principle actually date all the way back to Aristotle. Now, what What does mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive means? What that means is that in order to look at a very large problem, you have to separate the problem into different options and parts. So that way you can sort them through and figure out where to start with and what pieces you have to analyze. So again, mutually exclusive are items that only fit in one category at a time. And collectively exhaustive means all items that can all fit into one category. Now, once you use a MECE approach effectively, that's when you start using this other framework, which is a logic tree, which is essentially taking those different categories and trying to bridge them together. Again, very much in a logic tree, to try and work your way backwards from a problem and analyzing all the categories that you have and the different options you've come up with. So here's an example of one of those logic trees, which is how can we increase profitability, right? And this is where you use the MECE model to essentially put things into either one category or another. Things are either mutually exclusive to themselves or collectively exhaustive. Again, grouping a bunch of things that go into one category. Now, notice with this logic tree, we found a way to put everything in its own category, and there's not a whole lot of overlap. That's the key, because then you can actually have a map that you can form a hypothesis around and start really visualizing the problem and, more importantly, the paths to the solution to get to where you want to go. Again, think about that question earlier. Where do we want to go, and do we have a growth strategy to get there? If you know where you want to go, then you can reverse engineer and then find out which paths to illuminate to get there. Now, once you do this and you formulate your hypothesis, you can do what's called a QDT, otherwise known as a quick and dirty test, which means what assumptions are you making that need to be true in order for your hypothesis to be true? If any of these assumptions are false, then technically your hypothesis is false. For example, if one of your assumptions about selling direct to customers is we need to be there in person, if that is false, for example during COVID, then technically your hypothesis is false in terms of being there to sell direct to customers. So by having an initial and structured framework to develop your first hypothesis and your initial hypothesis, this allows your team to very quickly identify where the research should be, analysis, and more importantly, come up with a very robust conclusion in the shortest amount of time. That's why I felt that among this whole book, this is the most important step to get right first. If you don't get this part right from the beginning, the rest of it's just going to be a nightmare. And one thing that I would say is that the MECE model and logic tree isn't perfect for everything. One thing that I think is very helpful is having very open-ended brainstorming sessions, in which case I will recommend a book that I mind-bloomed a couple months ago, which is Back of the Napkin, Solving Problems and Selling Ideas with Pictures by Dan Rome. This is a fantastic book to start getting ideas about how do you brainstorm and structure, ideas, right? And of course, on the back of the napkin, of course, because we're in Silicon Valley, so this would be very handy. But I think it's a great book to go along as a companion to this one. So that's your book of the week. Definitely go out and get it. I think it's a great book, especially if you're having to do a new product launch or perhaps think about your business in from a new standpoint, especially post-COVID. I think this is a great book because you can really spend at least a week on each chapter and really focus on the exercises and the approaches. But either way, fantastic book. There's a reason why McKinsey is a $1 billion management consulting firm, so you can get the best out of this from this book. So that's the book of the week. Happy Wisdom Wednesday. I hope you're staying safe out there, and as always, I'll see you next week. Bye for now.